Just as every year, this year's annual conference or Intercultural Interfaith Dialogue is jointly organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, Institute of International Relations in Prague, the Prague Group of Ambassadors of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the Anna Lindh Foundation. As organizers of this event, we're proud to state that the conference has established itself as an international forum for meetings between the prominent representatives of the diplomatic community, academics, faith-based organizations, and civil society. This year, the sub-theme of our conference is Building Trust Among Future Communities, as it focuses on the role that religion and faith communities can play in fostering trust relationships within different cultural and diplomatic spheres. Recent research shows that religion has moved more to the center of our lives as a result of the challenges that the COVID-19 crisis has brought. Religion has become a source of hope, consolation, and inspiration for many in the past year. While faith helps to heal and recover from the difficulties of life, such as the one caused by the pandemic, it also has the power to promote respect for others, eradicate prejudices, emphasize honesty in our relationships. This momentous conference provides an important platform and opportunity to highlight how religion, faith leaders, and faith-based organizations can play a progressive role in various processes of building trust. It does so by highlighting three types of trust relationships, each of which is the theme of one panel. First, trust between different cultures within a society. Second, trust between the state and society. And third, trust in diplomatic relations. And let me introduce our distinguished speakers of the opening panel. Among our speakers are His Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, Mr. Jakub Kulhánek. His Excellency Emil Bağış, who is the Chairperson of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Prague Group, Ambassador of Turkey to the Czech Republic. Dr. Terezabal Schmidt, who is the Deputy Head of Interreligious Affairs and Society at the Global Ethic Foundation. And last but not least, Dr. Patrice Brodeur, Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Montreal and Senior Advisor to the King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz International Center for Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue. First, let me give the floor to His Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, Mr. Jakub Kulhánek.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you here at the Chernihiv Palace for the 6th Intercultural and Interfaith Dialogue Conference. The conference is hosted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic and co-organized with help from our partners, the OIC Ambassadors Prague Group, the Anna Lindh Foundation, and the Czech Institute of International Relations. Let me say that I would like to wholeheartedly thank all the organizers and partners of this conference for bringing us together today. As you are all aware, due to the current COVID-19 restrictions, we have opted for a hybrid format of our conference. This is the sad reality of today's world, but I'm sure you are going to enjoy this conference nonetheless. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound impact on our lives. It has served as a powerful reminder of how fragile and vulnerable our society is. For many, it has brought some serious soul-searching and made us rethink our priorities in our lives. But also, it has clearly demonstrated how interconnected and yet at the same time isolated we as individuals are. And this brings me to what we are going to be discussing at this conference: the role of culture and faith in today's world. Well, it can be seemingly dismissed as something out of date, but in fact it is something that is very intrinsic to each and every one of us, whereby it helps inform our behavior on a daily basis, but also on the more negative side, it might enact barriers between individuals as well as between nations. However, and perhaps because of that, we ought to look for ways to better communicate as we are living in a deeply interconnected world. The ever-growing interconnectedness of events, people, and technology brings about new challenges which we cannot solve without a real dialogue among different cultures and religions. But the prerequisite for any meaningful dialogue is trust. And this is why I'm so happy that the title of this year's conference is Building Trust Among Future Communities. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all destined to live together in this one interconnected world, and trust is a powerful force on which we can create harmony and peace among nations. In order to protect our citizens, we have to focus on building trust among nations through intercultural and interfaith dialogue. But trust is a precious commodity, and it takes honesty, humility, and empathy. And last but not least, a lot of patience too. Being able to step into the shoes of someone else is not easy. Trying to look at the world through the eyes of someone else is very demanding indeed. But we have to try. To conclude my short opening remarks, I want to underline the importance that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic and I personally attach to the intercultural and interfaith dialogue. Only through respect of each other, we will be able to tackle all the challenges we are facing in today's world. I wish you all to engage in a rich and thought-provoking dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your valuable remarks. Now I would like to hand over the floor to His Excellency Egemen Bağış, Chairperson of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Prague Group, and Ambassador of Turkey to the Czech Republic.
Minister Kulhánek, High Representatives Mauritinos, distinguished ambassadors, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege for me to address all of you today. To start with, I would like to thank His Excellency Jakub Kulhánek, Minister of the Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, for his opening speech and thoughtful remarks, which underline the decisiveness of the Czech Republic to promote dialogue among cultures. As the chairperson of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation Prague Ambassadors Group, I would also like to thank the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs for hosting this conference every year as a concrete symbol of Czechia's efforts for furtherance of harmony and peaceful coexistence all over the world. As a group of OIC embassies in Prague, we have been co-organizing this conference since its inception 6 years ago. Let me start with the wise words of world-renowned Turkish philosopher Mevlana Celaleddin Rumi, who was born in the beginning of the 12th century. I would like to recite one of his most memorable verses to better explain the purpose of this conference. Come again, please come again. Religious, infidel, heretic, or pagan, whoever you are, even if you repent 100 times, and 100 times if you broke your promise, this door is not the door of hopelessness and frustration. This door is open for everyone. Come as you are. Distinguished guests, dialogue among cultures and religions is the foundation of mutual respect within our societies. Dialogue fosters the atmosphere of trust between communities as well as the cohesion in our societies. However, the greatest threat to building trust among communities is the disturbing rise of racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and hate speech throughout the world. Such dangerous threats, threatening our common values, should not be allowed to disturb the atmosphere of mutual understanding and dialogue, as well as peace and harmony of our societies. Without a doubt, we believe in the merit of peaceful coexistence of all people, regardless of which religion they embrace. We can only achieve this goal to the extent we can stand united against all types of religious hatred. On our part, Turkey actively supports international efforts to raise awareness in combating intolerance and violence against individuals based on religion or belief. The Christchurch terrorist attacks of 2019 was a litmus test for all to show solidarity against those who tried to divide us. I am glad that the support of the international community was unequivocal. As a tangible reflection of the solidarity, the OIC foreign ministers designated March 15 as the International Day to Combat Islamophobia last year. Indeed, to understand the global scope of Islamophobia, the work of international mechanisms operating under OIC will give clear guidelines. To name some of them, OIC Contact Group on Muslims in Europe, the OIC Contact Group on Peace and Dialogue, Islamophobia Observatory, and Independent Permanent Human Rights Commission all make valuable efforts to nurture religious tolerance. Turkey initiated the Alliance of Civilizations together with Spain in 2005. In its 16th year, the need for the alliance has not decreased, but increased due to the current level of extremism, racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia in the world. Different social segments are exposed to hate speech, polarization, and discrimination every day in various corners of the world. Populist politicians give credit to these dangerous events for their personal political interests. The Alliance of Civilizations is the antidote to these tendencies. I'm honored to be among the members of the high-level advisory council of the Alliance. As some of you know, the Geneva office of the Alliance was inaugurated 3 days ago. The office will further allow for close contact and cooperation of the Alliance with the human rights mechanisms based in Geneva. I would like to thank my good friend, High Representative of the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, and former Foreign Minister of Spain, His Excellency Miguel Moratinos, for accepting our invitation and joining our conference today. Thank you, Miguel. I was honored to be among the co-founders of the Alliance with him when Prime Ministers then, Zapatero and Erdogan, first launched the initiative 16 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, Muslims constitute one of the most important elements of European countries. They are the main targets of racism, hatred of Islam, xenophobia, and discrimination. We observe a rising trend in the number of xenophobic attacks committed against migrant communities living in Western Europe in recent years. Security authorities report a rising trend in the numbers, and the real numbers are actually much higher. The majority of the victims do not report daily life racism and discrimination cases. The problem of institutional discrimination is also very well known, but victims do not report this with the fear of bureaucratic consequences. Racist and discriminatory practices in employment, education, and social life trigger the tendency of introversion within the migrant communities and hinder their efforts of integration into society. Racist and discriminatory discourse also sows the seeds of division within societies and undermine their sense of belonging to and their trust in the society they live in. Rising racism and hatred of Islam trends in many corners of the world are factors that urge us to take action. Although media and politicians have an important role in directing societies in a responsible manner on this issue, we observe with concern that populist use of discriminatory and xenophobic discourse as a tool for popular policies. These extreme discourses of politicians can lead to racist attacks. Western countries should react, in fact, much more resolute against all discriminative discourses. Political and religious leaders have a special responsibility to promote peaceful coexistence. But instead, we see that based on anti-migrant sentiments, which have also been empowered by rising trends of xenophobia and hatred of Islam, lead to irrational political discourses with the aim to increase pressure against migrant societies. The discourse and rhetoric of unsuccessful integration is one of these. We do not and cannot agree with this concept. In this new century of globalization and cultural diversity, the theories of the 1970s and 1980s are outdated and irrelevant. Therefore, we should do more to encourage the integration process. Ethnic profiling of migrants by security institutions is another issue we observe in recent years. This profiling often leads to unjust security actions against immigrants. This problem often comes along with the disproportionate use of force against immigrants and Muslims by the police. Unfortunately, migrant issues are handled in a lot of European countries from a security point of view. Immigrants should not be seen as a security threat. European countries should research for the right partners to handle this problem with a rational approach involving migrants and their countries of origin. The problem of discrimination, xenophobia, hatred of Islam, and racism can no longer be ignored. It requires urgent action both at national and international level. Let us not forget that one of the most successful businessmen of our times, Steve Jobs, was actually an immigrant Syrian baby who was adopted by an American family, and he built one of the biggest corporate entities. And the founders of Pfizer-BioNTech vaccination, Doctors Özlem Türeci and Uğur Şahin, were Turkish immigrants who grew up in Germany. So migration can also be a very positive concept. At the national level, legislative, administrative, and educational measures are needed, starting from addressing the root causes, showing solidarity with the victims, as well as ensuring relevant data collection and reporting. Distinguished guests, we strongly believe that multilateral international platforms should pay further attention to increasing awareness about problems that migrants face and help them overcome their difficulties. We must use the international fora to take joint concrete action to counter these dangerous trends, strengthening mechanisms and establishing new platforms where the victims can directly report incidents of hate speech, crimes, xenophobic, and anti-Semitic or anti-Muslim attacks can help constitute concrete steps in this direction. The international community must focus on taking concrete and effective measures against these dangerous trends and make sure that the issue of countering xenophobia remains a top priority on international fora. This year, we are celebrating the 700th birthday of another Turkish poet and humanist, Yunus Emre. Let me conclude my remarks with his words. Come, let us all be friends for once. Let us make life easy on us. Let us be lovers and loved ones. The earth shall be left to no one. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Fighting off the increasing challenges of xenophobia, hate speech, racism, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism has become an important global challenge these days, indeed. Our next speaker is Dr. Terezabal Schmidt, the Deputy Head of Interreligious Affairs and Society from the Global Ethic Foundation. Dr. Beilschmidt, the floor is yours.
Your Excellency, Minister Kulhánek, Your Excellency, Ambassador Bağış, Your Excellencies, dear ladies and gentlemen, I feel honored to be part of this important intercultural and interfaith conference and to be able to talk to you about the works of the Global Ethic Foundation. More than 30 years ago, the Swiss theologian Professor Hans Küng diagnosed a fundamental crisis in the world, a crisis of world economy, of world ecology, of world politics, which manifested itself in poverty, hunger, unemployment, wars, corruption, natural disasters, and much more. We all know that this diagnosis is today more acute than ever. In his search for ways out of this crisis, Hans Küng, who taught at Tübingen University, identified ethical perspectives in different world religions as an aid to orientation. He then named two principles to which all world religions refer as the foundation of a new, more peaceful and just world order. These principles are humanity and the so-called Golden Rule. Included in these two principles, there were four so-called directives in 1990. First, non-violence. Second, justice. Third, honesty. And fourth, equal rights for all people. In 2018, a fifth directive was added, ecological responsibility. These values were recognized by the Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago in 1993 and in Toronto in 2018 in the so-called Global Ethic Declaration. In 2001, Hans Küng presented his idea of a global ethic to the United Nations General Assembly in New York. It was then included in the United Nations agenda, and the UN resolution of November 2001 marked the breakthrough of the global ethic issue at the international political level. Hans Küng assumed that all religions are based on these fundamental convictions, and that if they are agreed upon and taken as a basis for human interactions, by the way, also political and economic ones, it would be possible to create peace among cultures. This was the underlying principle of the Global Ethic Foundation, which Professor Küng founded in 1995. Peace among cultures. You might think that this sounds like a pious wish and a naive idea. Prior to his death in April this year at age 93, and also thereafter, Hans Küng has indeed often been criticized for wanting to promote a single religion that encompasses all others and ignores the inherent differences. The global ethic was rejected as Western program, imposing itself on the rest of the world. It is true. More than 30 years ago, Hans Küng and Christian theology in general were not as sensitive as they should have been towards other worldviews and perspectives, as well as other religious, cultural, and societal contexts. But far from projecting his European Christian view onto other cultures, what Hans Küng really wanted was to show the commonalities all religions have, and that there are basic underlying principles that unite us in all our diversity. Accepting and even celebrating diversity means that we also understand that there is a common ground on which encounter and understanding is possible. Therefore, the idea of a global ethic was not developed merely as an abstract theory and distant utopia preached in religious places. Hans Küng and his collaborators in the creation of this idea were explicitly concerned with putting a forward-looking and realistic vision into practice, hence the title Global Ethic Project. But what significance can a global ethic take on today in a world that is increasingly described as being divided? Let me give you an example from my own experience as a scholar doing research on DITIB mosque communities in Germany. DITIB was founded as an Islamic organization by the Turkish religious authority Diyanet in the 1980s and up to today, it has close institutional and structural links with Diyanet, and thus with the Turkish government. These relations have long been approved by the German state. It was even regarded as beneficial that Turkish authorities would look after the needs of Turkish Muslims who had long become members of German society. However, after the attempted coup in 2016, the tide has turned. Once the favored partner of the German state, DITIB's role has now become highly contested. This has much to do with the lack of transparent communication of the DITIB headquarters in Cologne and other issues that were regarded as influence of Turkish politics in Germany's interior affairs. But this has also led to much insecurity in interreligious circles and in interreligious dialogue in general. As a matter of course, DITIB representatives no longer take part in many dialogue initiatives, and it is often questioned whether DITIB members should be talked to at all. But I believe that it is far more dangerous to cut the connections than to talk to contested organizations. In the end, it is the people in these organizations, the religious Muslims in this case, who we stop talking to. Their living in Germany and being part of its society is a reality that has not only to be accepted, but to be endorsed, as German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier did in 2018, and as his predecessor in office, Christian Wulff, has also made clear back in 2010. Islam is part of Germany, and so are the Muslims living here. We need to be critical, yes. Discussions can be controversial, yes. But it always has to be a constructive and open conversation. No state can allow itself to shy away from communication with people who not only are, but want to be part of society. The consequences could be isolation and alienation, but they could also be rejection and even hate. Hans Küng's takes on this was as follows. He was clear when it came to talking to terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda. No, but he was a proponent of taking up negotiations with the Taliban and Hamas, for example. So that we're talking about years back. As we all know, the case of the Taliban has become very topical again, as recent developments in Afghanistan have shown. Political discussions circle around the question of the recognition of the Taliban or not. Recognition, however, is not the same as taking up talks. Because what happens if we don't talk to a certain group? If we stop exchanging views and opinions, and most importantly, listening to each other? What is the alternative to dialogue? Hate or war? Is there an alternative to dialogue at all? I don't think so. What we need on diplomatic levels is openness, and this in turn could lead to collaboration and even friendship, as difficult as it may seem. And again, this does not mean that we have to be uncritical and tolerate repression and violence. That's where religion comes into the picture. I am convinced that interreligious dialogue is relevant for political action. We need trust-building measures between religions and within religions. We need education in religious and cultural literacy, as it is one of the core competencies of not only politicians, but of all members of culturally and religiously diverse societies. Moreover, we need to strengthen the role of religious actors and religious organizations in societal matters. In this regard, we at the Global Ethic Foundation conduct a project that supports several towns in the federal state of Baden-Württemberg, where our foundation is situated, to create their so-called councils of religions. Through these councils, trust between the religious communities on the one hand, and communication between the religious communities and the administration of the town, on the other hand, is strengthened. But the actual goal of this project is to make the role of religious actors in trust-building measures inside their towns and beyond more visible. Another project of ours is the Interfaith educational program, Values Are One, that trains people from different religious and ethnic backgrounds as interfaith and intercultural ambassadors. Networked together as a loose team, these ambassadors create and carry out intercultural and interfaith workshops, seminars, and activities. We believe that interfaith dialogue is an important means to build solidarity. In order to make it easier for people from different backgrounds to come into contact with each other, to get to know other ways of life, and to be able to understand them better, projects that support intercultural encounters and other informal ways of communicating cultural and religious education are very important. I explicitly include interfaith encounters and the understanding of common values in this context, as they have the potential to positively influence the climate within a society in the long term. In the interreligious sphere in particular, encounter situations have a preventive character and potential religiously charged conflicts. The encounter here should be based on personal exchange in everyday situations and take place in partnership and at eye level. It is not only theoretical discourse that is important, but also the exchange of different everyday experiences and subjective approaches to religion and religiosity. Only in this way it is possible to really talk to each other about differences and similarities instead of just analyzing them. The global ethic offers a good starting point for defining common values. Moreover, it forms the basis for practical, real-life dialogue, in which people from different religions can work on common goals together precisely because of their religious motivation. This also helps to find answers to urgent social, political, economic, and even ecological questions. The global ethic invites us to a change of perspective, not to fixate only on what separates us, but to look at what we have in common, what unites us. If we are ready to genuinely engage with each other, interfaith relations can be a powerful means of expressing solidarity and building trust. One of Hans Küng's central tenets was namely, no peace among nations without peace among religions. No peace among the religions without dialogue among the religions. No dialogue among the religions without global ethical standards. No survival of our globe without a global ethic. With this in mind, I wish you all a successful and fruitful conference that brings many new ideas and ways of building trust between and within different cultures and religions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Beilschmidt, for your speech. The work of Hans Küng is indeed fascinating. Finally, I'm happy to give the floor to our last speaker, Dr. Patrice Brodeur, Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Montreal and Senior Advisor to the King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz International Center for Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Your Excellencies, Minister Kulhánek, Minister and Ambassador Bağış, and Your Excellency Miguel Ángel Moratinos, High Representative for the United Nations Alliance of Civilization, Your Excellencies representing the different diplomatic corps of present here today, especially those related to the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, as well as all others, and ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by saying Dobre rano, Günaydın, good morning, Sabah al-Khair, Boker Tov, and wish you all the greetings of the former Secretary General of the International Dialogue Center, KAICIID, His Excellency Faisal bin Muammar, whom many of you know because he's been here in previous years. He conveys his greetings for not being able, and apologizes for not being able to be here today. I convey also the greetings of the current interim Deputy Secretary General, Ms. Ilham Ashejni, who is currently at the head of the KAICIID International Dialogue Center in Vienna, Austria. We hope indeed to experience, since its inception 9 years ago, that the international governmental organization KAICIID, dedicated to promoting interreligious and intercultural dialogue, can indeed contribute to this year's theme to highlight the ways faith-based organization and interfaith dialogue can help in both building and renewing trust within society in difficult times, such as post-conflict and post-pandemic periods. Indeed, our humanity has been facing a global health pandemic that has not only further aggravated existing socioeconomic disparities, whether intranationally or internationally, but also fueled increased levels of intolerance, as we've heard from our previous speakers, reflected in an exponential growth in racist hate speech of different kinds, such as Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Asian, anti-Roma, or xenophobic, especially through social media, leading only too often to hate crimes and acts of terror, sometimes in the false name of one religion or another, and increasingly so in the name of narrow ethno-nationalism, whether extreme right or extreme left on the traditional political ideological spectrum. These challenges threaten the quality of our global, national, and local social fabric, fragilizing social and intergroup dynamics within increasingly plural communities and societies. The situation seems dire indeed, yet there are rays of hope to build upon, and we come here today to share, examine, and magnify, hopefully, our hopeful practices that lead towards more resilient future communities. One such area of hope is how the increased practices of intercultural and interreligious dialogue worldwide has increased levels of trust among certain segments of our present communities. Although, in all honesty, the scale remains way below the needs if we want to reach indeed a more sustainable and more sustainability and social cohesion for our future interdependent local communities, while we all face an even graver common existential human threat with the long-term challenges of climate change. Indeed, dialogue for trust building is absolutely crucial for sustainable human security. While our humanity is currently also facing many tensions inhibiting wider and more effective global support for multilateralism, which is so necessary to confront better our many common challenges, one positive development in recent decades has been the growing consensus that has emerged worldwide amongst the leadership of traditional religious communities, as well as many new religions and spiritual movements, whether big or small demographically. That is, religions should be instruments for peace and not the reverse. The rejection of radical extremist and terrorist discourses in the name of one religion or another is truly a positive historic paradigm shift. This positive change is the result of a steady increase in dialogue activities, whether more local or more global, that has often resulted in bold new declarations, whether intra-religious, and I can think of the Marrakesh Declaration, the Charter of Mecca, for example, or Fratelli Tutti. These are all examples of intra-religious declarations, as well as bilateral examples, whether one talks about Islamo-Christian, like the Human Fraternity, Abu Dhabi Declaration, etc., etc. There are trilateral declarations as well as many multi-religious ones as well. They are all clear proof that dialogue does increase trust across people with often very different religious worldviews. One can find dozens of these examples in the Dialogue Knowledge Hub of the website of KAICIID. There is now a growing body of evidence gathered around the new field of interreligious and interfaith dialogue studies that has emerged in the last decade to monitor empirically, to analyze interdisciplinarily, and to contextualize pragmatically all the various kinds of dialogue, as well as the growing diversity of methods used to promote dialogue amongst a growing number of very different audiences. Clearly, the field of interreligious or interfaith dialogue is growing daily in both quantity and complexity. However, with this growing complexity comes a variety of challenges particular to dialogue. For a start, in some circles, dialogue can become a fashionable concept that then runs the risk of becoming rather superficial, only reaching to the proverbial members of the choir. Another challenge is that dialogue can become counterproductive, especially when there is a lack of true collaboration between organizational actors involved in overlapping areas of concern or of geographical areas of action. There is also a challenge when dialogue potentially becomes, or is perceived to have become, a tool for instrumentalization of different kinds, which can come from a multitude of directions. Charting that delicate balance to avoid all those potential and real pitfalls is incumbent on all persons and organizations seriously committed to the best quality dialogue possible, whether interpersonally or inter-organizationally. This requires a commitment to intellectual curiosity and honesty, as well as ethical solidarity and spiritual compassion, as was mentioned by the previous speaker. Indeed, if we want the transformative power of dialogue, so potentially effective to create long-lasting trust for the viability of future communities, and not only amongst those individuals already relatively well-intentioned, but also with and amongst those not so inclined to dialogue, at least initially, then we must reach out beyond the choir, expand the table of dialogue, and even go towards people not interested in dialogue, so as to become ever more inclusive in our efforts to practice meaningful and impactful dialogue. In other words, we need to grow, as my colleague, Professor Abu Nimr at KAICIID teaches, from the harmony model of interreligious dialogue, which is a good start to develop initial trust interpersonally, indeed. We move from that model to the liberation model of dialogue that address squarely the common challenges faced by people sharing a common space intercommunally. This liberation model of dialogue helps to find ways to collaborate across differences for more equitable justice and peace, based on deeper respect for differences. Yet, there is a need to move even one step further, especially if we find what I call a dangerous codependency of victimization discourses that fuels mutually exclusive perceptions. This phenomenon directly contributes to various forms of intolerance. It does not matter whether these are based on true historic, recent, or current traumatic experiences, or whether they are based on manufactured fears and systemically reproduced ignorance. We need, in addition to the first two models of dialogue, a third complementary one. It is called a relational ecosystem for peace. This system is based on a two-legged approach, the practice of compassionate listening, and that of interworldview dialogue based on a better understanding of the interrelationship between identity and power dynamics. This double approach to dialogue allows people with different degrees of traumas and victimization discourses to slowly take responsibility for their own personal and collective histories, as they also open up to acknowledge the hurt and pain of others too. It begins the process not only of reconciliation, but eventually of deep healing. That is the only way to avoid future recurring cycles of violence. A book written by Professor Mark Gopin that is just coming out next week by Oxford University Press confirms this double approach summarized in the symbols of the head and of the heart. It is entitled Compassionate Reasoning, Changing the Mind to Change the World. All three of those complementary dialogical models are taught in KAICIID's educational online courses and in-person trainings, such as our Fellows Program, our collaboration with the World Scouting Movement, our trainings in social media, etc., as well as in many of its manifold programs, convening religious actors and policymakers working at any one of the 7 levels of governance, from the local to the global. Indeed, KAICIID offers a model where head, heart, and hands for concrete actions are better coordinated and explicitly so. These educational and programmatic endeavors seek to increase capacity building amongst various communities of actors that can benefit from more practices of dialogue. These are most offered through its two main global training programs, the Fellows I mentioned before, and the Dialogues for Peace with the Scouts, as well as through its European, African, and Southeast Asian regional programs in particular. They include the development of regional platforms in order to address specific regional priorities, for example, around the use of dialogue to improve the relations between European host communities and new people seeking refuge, or through social media training to reduce hate speech online, first developed in the Arab region platform. Very often, KAICIID also works in close collaboration with different organizational partners, both religious and multi-religious, as well as non-governmental, governmental, and intergovernmental, including the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations. In a nutshell, there is an urgent need for infusing an ever-increasing number of both religious and secular communities and organizations with the learnings that come from practicing one or all three of these dialogue models, as well as choosing more effectively from the many different methods now available in the growing practices of interreligious and intercultural dialogue worldwide. In closing, I wish to express once more my gratitude for having been invited to all the organizers and participants present here. I look forward to continuing our learning together today through an open and constructive dialogue. Teşekkür ederim. Shukran jazilan. Toda rabba. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Brodeur, for your valuable remarks. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, we have now come to the end of our panel. Before I close this session, let me tell you that after the entire year of virtual events and conferences, we're happy to be able to physically meet you at the Chernin Palace within the framework of the 6th Annual Conference on Intercultural and Interfaith Dialogue. Due to the ongoing COVID situation, however, some of our speakers in the following panels will have to participate online, while many of them will fortunately be here with us in person. We're now going to have a 15-minute coffee break, probably up to 20 minutes, and then proceed to the panel titled Power of Religion in Building Trust Within Society. I very much hope that it will be a fruitful conference. Thank you.